Hello. How are things? Hey, Ed.
Standing there looking pensive, can I ask you a hopefully quick question? Is there really an issue of spoilage related to whole grains as opposed to fine grains? Because of the, I guess it would because of the oil.
Rancidity.
Yeah.
There, there can be, but it depends how it was milled, and then there were steps 150 years ago to deal with that. So it's typical.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can
Yeah.
flash steam it, or you can, similar to oats, where oats will go rancid
Okay.
pretty
So
quickly with the
what
oils.
causes rancidity?
It's the oils, and
The
I don't
oils,
know much
right.
more beyond
Yeah.
that. So it's how
And-
they're disturbed. So the wheat
Okay.
itself will not go rancid, but once everything's exposed,
Got it.
then it will.
And are there actual health or nutrient concerns with rancidity of those oils?
It's a really good question.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm not sure. I don't know. Like
If it's-
everything, if it happens enough, it probably affects taste. But
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, it can
anyway.
affect the flavor, and I think for us, we use it as an argument for more fresh milling and things anyway, and it's sort of a novel concept. But yeah, it's a really good point. So, yeah.
You were just noting that the cloth and black is
not very helpful. It's about 20 minutes slow.
I'm okay. Yeah, I'll be able to check mine. So,
Okay.
yeah.
If you want a time, just one. I figured you probably didn't need a time check, but if you want one, I'm happy to keep it.
I think I should. I have more slides than I usually do, but I think I can do it in 45 pretty easily. I'll just charge through it. We'll see, but I'll chug through it pretty quick, hopefully.
Excellent.
But yeah, I'll be able to tell if I need to wrap, I think. So the full time is till, yeah. I won't go over 50, that's for sure. So I should go 40.
I would say no worries.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we're going to try to end promptly. Like we'll cut off questioning at 1:15.
Correct.
There's class in here at 1:30.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll chug through. I added the eugenics, but I can go through that quick.
Okay.
So.
Very good. Yep. 12:16. We're behind. That's not good if you're from the Midwest, right? Hello. Let's go ahead and get started, okay? Assuming this is on. Good afternoon. Is this on? Good. Excellent. Welcome to the Friedman Seminar. I'm Tim Griffin. I'm the director of the Agriculture, Food, and Environment program. Really excited today to introduce our seminar speaker, Dr. Steve Jones from Washington State. At least in my opinion, we don't have enough seminars from plant breeders. So Steve is going to fix that right now. But as you'll hear, a plant breeder with a wide range of interests, and we've been having some really interesting conversations actually over the last couple of months. So I'm going to give the next hour to Steve. Steve?
Great. Thanks, Tim. Thank you for having me here this afternoon, too. So I'm a wheat breeder and geneticist. I'll give a little background on that. I'm going to start by talking about eugenics. So I'll have just a few quick slides on eugenics. And eugenics was the planned breeding of humans to make them better. So I want to I'll say why I'm talking about that, and then I'll give a quick slide on white bread, and then white bread will permeate throughout the rest of the talk as well. And I guarantee I'll show you some pictures of some really delicious looking things too. So we'll start out with sort of a downer on the eugenics, and then I'll get in, and we'll finish with a children's book on bread. So you have that to look forward to. So we're at the Bread Lab. That's our website there. I'd encourage you to go there. We have a lot of essays and things that we've written in terms of things that I might not be able to cover just yet. So I did my PhD in genetics at UC Davis in the 80s, and as a geneticist, I wanted to learn about my field. What's the history of genetics? What am I in for here? And I became very interested in eugenics right away, and eugenics again was the movement to breed better humans, and it was a brutal and a hateful movement, and it was geneticists and plant breeders and animal breeders that promoted this. So I asked my professors there, what about eugenics, and they convinced me that it was a fringe kind of thing that happened for a few years and it wasn't that big a deal. It was a big deal, and I'll just give you a few slides that demonstrate that. Here's Teaching Eugenics by Selden, Inheriting Shame. It's a really nice book on an overview of it. It was not a fringe thing. Over 400 US colleges taught eugenics as a titled course. And I'll give you some dates there as well. But Harvard started teaching it in 1912. They ended in 1932. 1914 to 1948, 90% of high school books had it. 100% of genetics textbooks during this time had it. If you get bored, go to the library and look up some of these old textbooks and see what they talked about breeding humans. The American Breeders Association, the ABA, was founded in 1903. These were plant and animal breeders. They formed to put more science. Genetics had just been rediscovered 3 years prior. They wanted to add more science to their field. The head of the ABA was the head of the USDA at that time. Luther Burbank and others were in this group. In 1906, the ABA formed a eugenics subcommittee. Small committee, Luther Burbank and other plant breeders that you would recognize their names were on it. It was formed to emphasize the value of superior blood and the menace of society to inferior blood. We're talking humans here. They were also formed to study sterilization and other means of eliminating defective human germplasm. This group is out of California. They forcibly sterilized over 30,000 people in the state of California. We published on this a few papers. One is Eugenic Opportunity Structures, Teaching Genetic Engineering at U.S. Land-Grant University since 1911. That's in the Social Studies of Science journal. This is a professor from University of Vermont. We polled all the land-grant universities in this country, and almost to a group, as we had talked to the archivists and librarians, they say, we never taught eugenics here. And I said, would you mind checking? It turns out they did. Wisconsin started teaching it in 1911. My university started in 1920. They taught it to 1950, and I thought that was very late, right? 1950, the war was over in 45, and we're still teaching it as a titled course at WSU. I was horrified by that until I found out that Cornell taught it till 1965 as a titled course, and Rutgers taught it till 1972 as a titled course. So these are all titled courses. I called up Rutgers and talked to an archivist there, and I asked her how they could keep teaching it until 72 and why did they stop. She said the professor that taught it died. And that was a common way for eugenics to stop at our university. So it's just something to keep in mind as a geneticist. I do think about this, of how we work within our communities and how we can hurt our communities as well. White flour now, this is from the book White Bread by Aaron Barbro-Strain. It's a really nice introduction to white flour and the culture and the history of white flour and what it meant throughout time. These were common slogans from the time: eat right, eat white, white flour, red meat, blue blood. One need only compare strapping tall Americans with specimens from any brown bread eating nation. In strength, valor, and intelligence, the Americans surpassed them all. These are very common. This wasn't fringe stuff back then. Up-to-date bakery, the reason I have that there, my great uncle came from Poland just over 100 years ago. He came through Ellis Island, ended up in Newark, New Jersey, and he was a baker. He opened up a bakery. And he called it the Up-to-Date Bakery. And I thought that was, naively, I thought that he opened up his Polish-American dictionary and looked up modern and he found up-to-date. Turns out he didn't have a Polish-American dictionary back then, and it turns out I was wrong. Up-to-Date Bakery was a franchise. And it was a franchise designed just about 100 years ago so that Eastern Europeans didn't need to touch your dough and your bread anymore. So it was a franchise to bring mechanical mixing into our bakeries. And last time I was here in town, I went to the North End, Regina Pizzeria. I was in the neighborhood there looking for the pizzeria, and I stumbled upon a basement bakery in the neighborhoods there. I don't remember where it was, but I went down the steps and went into a basement bakery, and the ceiling was about that high. These were very common in all of our cities out east here, and many of them were Eastern Europeans, and there was a movement where the folks buying the bread did not want them touching the dough. And that's where mechanical mixing came in, that's where white bread came in, and I'll just leave that one at that. Okay, so now I'll talk about the happy things here. So I'll talk about wheat and what we do. Again, I'm a wheat breeder. We start with the farmer first. That may not be obvious as we go through, but I'll keep trying to bring it in. This is what 55 million acres of wheat looks like in the US. If it's a color there, that's where wheat is grown. If it's white, according to the USDA, there is no wheat being grown there. We work in the white parts here. So we work in this area here. We work right here. That's where my office is. That's Canada right there. Bill Gates and those folks are down there. So we're out of place to work on wheat. We're out of place. We don't do commodity wheat. We don't do commodity anything. And I'll explain that as I go through, and we can talk on questions about this. Basically, all that 55 million acres of wheat is the same. It's been designed for white flour. It's been designed for an industrial food system that we're involved in. That's what it is. Okay? We've been breeding wheat at my university since 1894. I'm the 5th winter wheat breeder to be hired there. I should say that our second winter wheat breeder went to Harvey to the Bussey Institute to get his PhD in genetics, and he came back as a AES member, American Eugenics Society member, just as an aside. Basically, this is all designed the same. It has been for about 100 years to make white flour, and I'll talk about the cost of that to us. I work in a very beautiful place. This is the Olympic Peninsula. That's Hurricane Ridge of the Olympic Mountains. To the back of us here looking at that would be Canada, across the Strait of Juan de Fuca to Vancouver Island. It's very beautiful. We work directly with farmers. We make what we do work for the farmer first. I work in a valley that the average farm size is 100 acres. The average farm size in the US is 1,000 acres. This is Nash Huber. He's at SQUIM. He does organic wheat, vegetable, animal rotation. That's wheat as a weed in his cabbages. He's much nicer than he looks. This is Sam Lucy, the other side of the Cascades. This is Twisp. He runs Bluebird Grain Farms, organic wheat, and milling. His average farm that he works on, his farm average field size is about 20 acres. It's in an area where urban encroachment was coming in. It's a place where people would want to live. It's very beautiful there. They limited the plot size to 20 acres. You could put a house on it. The other 19 acres he farms. So it's basically his model. Anna Martin, Osprey Hill Farms up in Acme, Washington. She raises poultry. She uses local grains for feed for her poultry organization. None of these people are in the commodity system. It's another shot of where I work. This is Whatcom County, just to the north. You see the farm size here. That's the Nooksack River, which is draining Mount Baker. The glaciers off of it, that's Canada right there. This is the type of farming that we're helping up there. What is our part in this? What is my part as a public servant? I'm a public scientist at a public university, paid by the public. What I'll say first is everything we do remains public. We don't tie up intellectual property and things like that in my program. So we keep things in the public realm. How do we do that then in a way that serves our public, our region, Northwest Washington first, and then much beyond that later? So we breed non-commodity wheat, barley, buckwheat, dry beans, rye, and other grains, and I'll show pictures of what that looks like. We work on flavor, functionality, nutrition. When I say functionality, I mean the physical functionality of making a bread product or something like that. Not nutritional functionality per se, but I will get into, we'll get into some of that. Flavor and nutrition are not favored in the commodity system. They're not rewarded in a commodity system is another way to say it. So we've been breeding wheat again at our university since 1894 until very recently in our program, we never bred for nutrition. Never. Iron, zinc, anything like that. It didn't matter. Doesn't matter. Neither did flavor, and I'll get into flavor. We're very interested in adding and keeping value where it's produced. If we grow wheat in an area like this, we want to mill it there, we want to malt it there, we want to bake it there, we want to brew it there, we want to distill it there. We want to consume it there. That's keeping it, that's getting beyond the sort of cliched notion of what local is. So, and I've spoken with a few of you already, but that's a word we use very rarely as local. Okay? This is what a wheat field and barley field looks like. That's Bridget Mainz. I'll talk more about my graduate students at the end here. That's barley, that's wheat. We look at variation within a field. We generate variation as breeders. So in that shot like that, you see probably 80 different types of wheat and barley. We can work up to 40,000 different wheats and barleys. What has it been selected for? What are we looking for? Are we looking for yield? We're looking for disease resistance. We're looking for white flour yield and things like that. The choices of a breeder are critical. If you don't look for something, you're probably going to lose it by chance. If you look for it, you can find it. If you want improved whatever, you can do it if that's your goal as a breeder. As breeders, we have that luxury, but also that responsibility of what are our targets and who are they set by. If our targets are set by that it needs to make a perfect Big Mac bun, guess what? We can do that, right? What if we don't want that is the question we ask. Or what if we don't want to be the ones to do that? So since the early 1900s, in this country and certainly all of Europe, breeders have selected for low ash. Ash is what's left when you burn flour at about 900 degrees. So you take flour and you burn it, and what's left are these things: zinc, selenium, iron, copper, other micronutrients. So the skill of a miller today is based on how much of this they can take out of the flour. Why? Because it makes little flecks in there. And we bleach wheat to oxidize it. We don't bleach it to make it white. These things won't go away if you bleach it. When I say we, I don't mean we bleach wheat. They. Okay? Let's put it that way. So by selecting by the breeders, saying, okay, we want less ash, we want less iron and zinc and selenium. That's a target. That's a formal target for wheat breeders in this country, is less ash, because they don't want little flecks in the flour. Why do we not want little flecks in the flour? I don't mind little flecks in the flour if it means I'm getting these things, right? It's an odd turn that we took, that this flour and our breads have to be lily white. It's odd in a way, it makes sense in a way too, because if you look historically, why did we sift out things from our flour? Why did the Greeks and Romans sift out things? So they could remove rodent droppings, sticks, stones, trash, other things that are in there. It was a sign of affluence to eat very clean flour and very white bread, right? It also became a cultural one much stronger than that. But we had this point in our time when we wanted these white things. And then that went further, and it went to this lily white, just iridescent kind of whiteness in our flour. The cost has been the reduction of these things here. This is a study that we did on historical lines grown in our state side by side. So from the 1840s to 65, the beginning of the Green Revolution, to what we called modern, which was a cutoff in 2003. Selenium has dropped 50%. Iron 11 and zinc 25. These are all significant values. That works. Breeding to take iron and zinc out of our food worked pretty well. What if we want to put it back in or never take it out? Well, that'll work too. This is white wheat, this is red wheat. These are the only two wheats that are grown on 50 million acres in this country. Okay? There's no button for that color or that color in the state of Kansas. There's 10 million acres of wheat. It's all that color. Okay? There's no button for it. The system can't react to that purple, right? Well, we can. We can do it here in this state. We can do it in Northwest Washington. This is work of Colin Curran McAdams. I'll show his work at the end. That's one of my students. These are very beautiful, by the way. These are barleys here, naked barleys. Purple, black, blue, and then that's a standard barley there. The blue color here is in the alurone. I'll show what that looks like later, and black and purple is in the pericarp. We can stack these up. What's the benefit of that? Okay, iron and zinc, milligrams per thousand, US average wheat, USDA. So USDA says what the average amount of iron is in the wheat that we eat. 31.9, and zinc is 26.5. Here are the mean values over time at our location for a purple wheat and a purple barley. 94 versus 31, 52 versus 26, 53, triple and double. That is significant. So that is significant. That's not just a little jump, right? If your RDA, depending on your gender and your age, is going to vary, but your RDA for iron is what, 10 to 18 or 20, something like that. Zinc is probably about half that, I think. Most adult males in this country, or many of them, I won't say most, but I'll just say there are adult males in this country that are zinc deficient. White flour has no zinc in it. The wheat kernel does, right? So in making that beautiful white flour, and I'll have a few more demonstrations of that, we've scrubbed all of that. None of this is of value to you if you're eating white flour. It's all gone. It's gone to the hogs. Okay, in our state, some of the uses for bran is they make little these little pots that they grow pot in now. So pot's legal in Washington. Some of the brand goes to pot growers so they can grow their plants in them. That's where the iron zinc's ending up, in our pot. Which I just thought maybe that's okay. I don't know. So this is Bridget Meintz and Colin Curran McAdams. This is out of their dissertations. That's unpublished. Important point here is, and that's blue. That's a pizza crust made out of blue wheat. That's a wood-fired oven in our lab. Our lab smells really good. It's delicious. So you're eating something, that's a whole wheat pizza crust. So I want to talk now a little bit about deliciousness. And it's a funny word, but it's a word that we embrace. We don't shy away from deliciousness. If we as breeders and as folks in the bread lab use what we do as a delivery mechanism for nutrition, which why are we eating if we're not doing that? We're using delivery mechanism for nutrition, it's got to be delicious, okay, or better, or it should, whatever, right? You can see a little of the blue in there. So Colin made this pizza there. So, as breeders, out of the commodity system, we no longer have someone defining for us what wheat should look like, what flour should look like, what anything that we do should look like, or how it should act. We have, again, the responsibility and the pleasure of defining that ourselves. So we had to develop a lab to do that, because there wasn't anywhere to send this stuff, right? We couldn't send purple wheat anywhere and say, can you make something out of it? Because if it were a normal test lab, they'd make a little white pup loaf of kind of Wonder Bread out of it, and we didn't want that. So we developed our own lab. And this is shots of our older lab here. This is Karen Hills, one of my former students, blowing a very expensive bubble in dough. So she's measuring the extensibility and the elasticity of it. So the point of my lab then, as a plant breeder, I have a lab, we call it the bread lab, is that we can look at flavor, nutrition, and functionality. What is the best use for our grains? There is a best use. So, and that's an important point, is if it's not defined for us, then what's it going to be? If we have a purple wheat that does really well for the farmer, is it going to make a chapati or a baguette? What is it going to make? That's our job, is to figure that out. Working with chefs and bakers, members of the community, very directly. When we first got to where we are in 2008, I was told that you can't grow bread wheat in northwestern Washington, north of Seattle. It's too wet, it's too cold. You'll hear the same thing here. We heard the same thing in Vermont. You hear the same thing around Nashville, North Carolina. You hear it everywhere, that you can't grow wheat of this type in that place. Okay, we used to, right? So we can. So the first thing we did when we got there in 2008 was plant what they said we couldn't do, which was red wheat, which is bread wheat. And we harvested it. This is Karen Hill's project, one of my former PhDs. She took it to a miller, has grown an organic farm. It was milled. We took it to George De Pasquale at Essential Baking in Seattle. It's the largest organic bakery west of the Mississippi. He said, nice colored, nice controlled, I don't have my glasses on, nice controlled acid flavors, strong hit of spice, strong hit of chocolate, very easy to work with, very nice flavor, good crumb, color, best flavor in 33 years of baking. That absolutely blew me away. Right? I've been working with wheat since 1977. If I had said to anybody up to this point, as I was eating it, that, oh boy, it has nice chocolatey overtones and a hit of spice, I don't know what would have happened, but it wouldn't be good. So immediately at that point, we knew we were onto something. And we knew there were, besides the nutritional end of things, there was flavor in what we do, and there is flavor in wheat. And if people tell you there's not flavor in bread or wheat, tell them to eat less white flour and to use the whole kernel, and you will get flavors, and you will get nutrition out of it. And I'm going to show you some shots. These are all, everything I'm going to show you now is 100% whole wheat. You have to pair the right variety with the right technique with the right product. If you do that, you're going to want to eat it. These are all whole wheat, natural ferment, long ferment. No commercial yeast, no crap in anything that I'm about to show you. Oh, I'll show you flavor first. So no crap in this either. So This is one wheat. So could we do flavor? This is one wheat from one location, dissecting into different things that we can get. So one wheat, one location, 1 year. Again, we could look at 40,000 per year. So imagine this graph exploding into 2, into however many you want to look at. This is a wheat that we're just milling it on a stone mill. We're getting coffee, nutty. We can get sour. We can get bright, sweet, bitter, spice, chocolate, hay, or grassy. Get all those things from a single variety in a single location in a single year. So we can do flavor. All of these are flavors by manipulating the time, the moisture, and the temperature. And by doing that, too, we're pulling out the nutritional value. So we probably won't go into sprouting much, but sprouting is a big part of this, too. OK, so I'll show you the breads in just a minute. This is a 5-foot pasta sheet here. This is Mark Vetri from Philly. OK, so functionality, when we talk about it, is this, is how is it going to, can you make a 5-foot pasta sheet out of it, out of whole wheat? We've all had, how many of you have had really bad 100% whole wheat pasta? It's the worst. It's the absolute worst, right? The only thing worse is bad whole wheat bread from the 70s, right? So that's an example of functionality. Does it stay together? That's a variety that doesn't work for bread, but it works very well for pasta. So Mark was in Italy. He's a chef down in Philly. He called up and he said, hey, these Italians are making pasta out of anything, right? Not just durum. They're just using anything they have. Do you think we could do that? And I said, yeah, come to the lab. And he goes, OK, I'll fly on the way back. So he hung up, and I thought, Seattle's not on the way back to Philly from Italy. So anyway, but he did. and that was about 5 minutes after he got there. And he said, I can go home now. Got it all figured out. So it's not just pairing the right things. It's having the desire and the gumption to want to do it, right? And to not think whole wheat pasta is going to suck. It doesn't have to. OK, so now I'll show some pictures. So this bread here has 3 ingredients in it: wheat, salt, and water. The wheat has been used to form a starter with its own natural yeast and bacteria. This bread has 3 ingredients in it. That bread is very delicious. It's a long ferment, so the phytates have been broken down. It's a natural ferment, and what we call hundo. The next few slides will show hundo. It just means it's 100%, which we didn't cheat. We didn't scalp off any bran or anything. We took 100 pounds of wheat and made 100 pounds of flour and then made products out of it. So we do that to show, we're a lab, okay? So we want to show we can do that. So if the normal way is to make 70 pounds of flour out of 100 pounds of wheat, the range might be somewhere in there. We can do it at 100. These are chefs and bakers that have incredible skill, right? What if we take that 70 and put 2% back, leave 2 or 3% in, or 5% in, or whatever, and just get more towards the middle where we're leaving that iron and zinc and selenium and fiber and other things that aren't in white flour. Okay? These also are long ferment, natural ferment hundo. If you're a baker, that's part of the holy grail right there. That's 100% whole wheat baguette. That doesn't suck. It's not dry, it's not crumbly, it's delicious. That's baked from wheat that's grown in an area that we were told you can't grow bread wheat. You can, right? Same thing here. That's from San Francisco. It's Josie Baker, a baker in San Francisco. This is a home shot that I did. So that's a waffle. That's a sourdough fermented, natural ferment. That's 100% whole wheat waffle. You can't do that out of the same flour that that baguette was made out of. There are different requirements there. This is light and fluffy. It's a whole different variety. That's an important point, too, is you can make these things work, but it takes the breeders and the farmers and everybody working together to pair the right product with the right thing. What happens to a lot of folks is they'll think, I'm going to go home tonight and make 100% whole wheat waffles. Chances are pretty good they'll suck, right? Because you're using the wrong flour, right? So it's an important point is to realize there's tremendous variation that may not be available to you as a chef or baker or whatever our calling is, a serious home baker. But that's 100% whole wheat. So is that. If the baguette is part of the Holy Grail, this is the Holy Grail. That's a croissant. That's 100% whole wheat croissant. They measure a baker would look at something, they're looking at this kind of figure in there, they're looking at the glassiness in those bubbles, you can kind of see it there. So this was baked by Jeff Yankelo. He's a King Arthur flour baker. In 2009, he won the Coupe du Monde de Boulangerie in Paris, France, which means on that day and that year in Paris, he baked the best bread in the world. He has a trophy about this tall for it. These people we work with in the bread lab, he baked this in the lab. So that's what it takes to make this. And again, we're thinking of the farmers here first, right? We're finding uses for a regional grain type of system. Once you eat one of those, you won't want to be in the same room as a white one. Okay, so those are all kind of fancy things done in big ovens. What about home baking? What about access in terms of what we do? What about price? What about affordability? What about time? If we're looking at access in terms of our communities, there's a financial access, right? Do you have the funds to buy something? Do you have access to it in general? Is it there? Do you have the time to do this, right? So you have location, you have funding, you have all these things that can affect access. Another one is knowledge. Do you have a skill level? Have you lost that? I learned to bake when I was 6 years old from my Polish grandmother. My nieces and nephews couldn't bake out of a bag, right? So there's a generational thing that's lost, right? Not necessarily on this generation, but once you lose that, you can lose it within your family and your community and your culture too. So part of what we do is try to bring access back in terms of, certainly as breeders, of making these things so they're not expensive, but also showing that we can bake something like this. And I'll show more of this at the end in terms of the children's book that they wrote. But this is 100% whole wheat loaf. There's some white, whole wheat white flour in there. That's my oven at home. This is done using all organic ingredients for well under $1. The amount of time that I spent on this that I'm not on my phone was 18 minutes. The total bake is much more than that, but in terms of prep, weighing, measuring, folding, getting it in the pan, cleaning up the pan afterwards was 18 minutes. The total time is longer than that. That total time is adjustable if you throw it in the fridge or something like that. There's no crap in that bread, right? You can't get the worst bread in the world for less than $1, right? I mean, a 99-cent loaf of bread at the grocery store probably has 25 ingredients in it. And you don't want 21 of those. So we work on this too, and I'll give a little more explanation of that. I'm going to talk now about 3 of my PhD students and the work that they do, and it'll sort of give an overview of what we do in the laboratory. This is Jennifer Doudna, CRISPR scientist. This was in the journal Nature 2 years ago. One of my students, Bethany Econopoli, gave this to me to read. She says, today's scientists could be better prepared to think about and shape the societal, ethical, and ecological consequences of their work, with some training about how to discuss science with non-scientists, and education that I have never formally been given could be transformative. I wasn't given that education either, right? I counted chromosomes for 5 years at Davis, right? I never looked up from the microscope, right? I wasn't part of a community. I was part of my lab. I was part of all that kind of stuff, but I wasn't part of a community. I didn't know what the breeding I was doing, where it was going to go, and how it's going to end up, and that there was nutrition and flavor and things that we did. So in my students, I really encourage them to be part of their community. They don't need much encouragement, so they come in that way. If they want to be part of a bigger, they want to get outside the lab. And what I'll say too is we're very isolated where we are. So we're 6 hours from the main campus. So we're isolated anyway, but to get out into our greater community, by community I mean non-geneticists and plant breeders. So this is Jack Laser up in northern Vermont at a field day. Just look at the variation within the group there too. Bridget Meintz, PhD student of mine, she defended her PhD on Monday. She'll be Dr. Meintz next Monday. That's her in the greenhouse. She works on barley. She loves barley. So the rest of us work on wheat. She loves barley a little too much. I mean, she really loves barley. She works on colored barley for food, brewing, and distilling, just some of the stuff that she works on in the greenhouse. She does mapping populations for malting and brewing. She looks at the agronomics versus the malting and brewing characteristics of it. This is a beer that's made out of all regional grains and hops and water from the region. So that's a genetic map there. She also works on dry beans. So we try to add variation to our fields and landscape, not just within our wheat crop and barley crop, but also in dry beans. Work with some really beautiful dry beans. We work on flavor. Here we're doing flavor. We do lunches in the lab often where we'll just taste the beans, see how they do. So we don't do tasting panels and things like that. We just eat it. So each of my students, they said, have at least one chapter that it's not them looking through a microscope or making a map or something like that. Bridges is stuck in a greenhouse with glass ceilings, and examination of gender disparity among plant breeding faculty at land-grant universities. So that'll be published next year. It's a first-person essay. It's not a real, I mean, you can imagine, right? So there is gender disparity in my profession and in most. So that's her essay. Colin Kern McAdams, he defended his degree about a month ago. He's going to California. He'll be working on seed potatoes with bijou seeds, specialty potatoes. He looks at chromosomes. This is a meiotic cell there. This is in the lab. He also does a lot of the color work, as does Bridget. There's a range of colors. That's the blue there onto different types. He works with tremendous variation in the field as well. So this is more of a commodity wheat here. This is the kind of variation that he generates. We don't do GMO anything. We never have. He works on this trait also. So this is life and death in wheat. So this is October. Normal wheat crop dies, you harvest it, and that's it. These are plants that don't die. So that's under genetic control. He looks at that for environmental reasons. He looks at that as giving the growers an option in what they do. We can add a single chromosome to wheat and it lives. We don't have it in there, it dies. Very simple trait genetically. Very complex, but you can distill it down. We can look at these chromosomes. These are Collin slides in black and white, or we can look at them in color. So that's the same cell. You'll see that they all look the same. Now they're not the same. You can paint the chromosomes, it's called, and you can follow them through the generations and see what chromosomes do what. Sort of classical cytogenetics. This is what I was trained for at Davis. This has 42 wheat chromosomes and 10 alien chromosomes. We call them alien. If you're not a geneticist, that may sound interesting or funny, I'm not sure, but it just means that there are different species coming in. We can then dissect that and do a genetic map and show here's that little bit. There are genes on that arm that make that plant decide to live or die. To me, it's a very beautiful question. So biologically, the question of life and death and how a wheat plant, how it doesn't decide to, but how it's evolved to decide, in quotes, to live or die is a very basic question for us as biologists. So we do that. He also decided that it would be good if we're working with this to name a new species. So he named a new species last fall. So at WSU, we've released over 100 wheat varieties. That's different. Those all have names. No wheat breeder in this country has ever named a wheat species that I'm aware of. So this is a brand new species. Colin named it. Here, the chromosomes are very beautiful in the plant itself. There's room for beauty in what we do as geneticists, and we embrace that. He named this species after Dr. Hannah Aussie. Professor Aussie was at WSU from 1914 to 1949. She has been completely forgotten as a scientist, as is very common. I found out about her when I was reading a notebook from the second wheat breeder at WSU that was written in the 1920s, and he said Professor Aussie was here, and she was talking about chromosome elimination in hybridization across species. And I about lost it because it's exactly what we do. And I went back and I read all of her papers, and she had done, and she informed us of how to do what we've done, and she did it all almost a century before we did it. It's amazing work that she did, and she's completely forgotten as a geneticist, as a scientist. She's forgotten for a few reasons. One is at her retirement party, there was a quote from a male scientist in the department who refused to identify himself that said, if she were a man, she'd be famous. Okay, that's one struggle she had. The other one was she outlived all her colleagues, which is also common. So she died in her mid-90s. Her colleagues all died in their 60s, or God, back then, even their 50s, right? So there was no one to write her obituary. She vanished. So we named a species after her to bring her back. Colin is also writing on alternative methods for intellectual property protection of crop plants. This has been discussed, this has been written, there have been seminars, and there have been whole week meetings about this. He wants to add a first-person version of this and just add more to this notion of how can we keep what we do public as public scientists? What do we do? Are farmers just renting their seed? They are. Has my generation been the one that's taking away a farmer's right that's been there for 10,000 years? It is. Do I want to be part of that? I don't. That's what he's writing about. Bethany Econopoli is the third student. So the other two are done. Bethany's finishing next spring. Oh, I should say, I forgot to give the background. So Bridget's bachelor's was from Scripps College in Claremont, California. Her bachelor's degree was in anthropology and gender and women's studies. Collins was on environmental sciences. Bethany went to UMass Amherst and then Colorado State University and got a master's in plant breeding. She then went to the Gates Foundation and worked there for 3 years, and then came to us. She's working on bees, buckwheat and bees. Buckwheat for us in terms of resistant starch and lysine that it adds to our diets. This is Bethany, that's Kim Bincheski. I'll show a photo of her, give a little more on her later. She's the managing director in the lab. They're harvesting the buckwheat. I don't know what I'm doing over there. This is both of them talking to a farmer. Again, we talk to farmers every day, at least by email or phone, or they come in or we go see them. We think it's so critical in what we do of work directly with the farmer, help make it work for them, and then go beyond. This is Keith Kistler. He runs Finn River Cidery over in Chimacum, Washington. It's a beautiful place. So they're talking about his buckwheat field there. So again, buckwheat is high in resistant starch, high in lysine. It's also very good for the bees, and I'll show a picture of that in just a second. Sonoko Sakai is a soba chef. She splits her time between LA and Tokyo and loves coming up to the lab too. So she does whole wheat udon. She also does 100% whole wheat soba. She's very good at what she does, and she helps me with my poetry too, which is pretty good too. So she's a very patient person. This is variation. This is what variation looks like. So it's plant breeders. This plant is from Bhutan. It's about, in the field, it's about 6 feet tall. This is a little one that was grown in Pennsylvania. That's what we work with as breeders. We work with variation. What is that variation going to be for? Is it going to be for just yield or something like that? Or is it going to be for flavor and nutritional value? And does it make the perfect soba? The absolute perfect soba. Can we do that? Yeah, why not? There's a bee. Bees, we've all heard the bee stories. Buckwheat is a safe haven for bees within an agricultural landscape. So we place, and this is funded by Patagonia, so the clothing manufacturer funds us to help place buckwheat in the agricultural landscape in organic situations. It gives the bees somewhere to go. Buckwheat is a late flowering crop in the summer. And again, it's just a safe haven for bees. It's an absolute beautiful crop. If you haven't seen it or if you haven't stood in a buckwheat field, you should. It's amazing. So Bethany's working on buckwheat. She's also breeding wheat for the state of Alaska. Alaska has no wheat breeder. So she's working with Alaska to breed wheats for. She's using Nordic lines from Denmark. She's also working on regional mills and the complications of decentralizing what we do. So we lost 25,000 mills in this country 100 years ago. 25,000 flour mills went away. Today there's less than 200. So we lost that regionality to what we do. That's what Bethany is working on that. She's also working on the nutritional value of what we do. This is a stone mill here. Almost everything we do in the lab is 100% whole wheat. You put 100 pounds of flour and 100 pounds of wheat in there, out comes 100 pounds of flour. You put 100 pounds of wheat into this, which is a roller mill, which is what basically all of our wheat is done in this country. They're designed in the 1880s. You put 100 pounds of wheat in there, you're getting 70 pounds of stuff coming out the bottom, and I'll show what that looks like in a second. What is in a grain of wheat? A grain of wheat is incredibly nutrient dense, right? We've got all of this stuff, right? Phytochemicals, phenolics, antioxidants, all these minerals, vitamins, all of that is in the wheat. All of it is in that drawer right there. None of it is in there. That wheat kernel was 8 to 10% fiber. That's 0. That wheat had whatever percent of zinc, selenium, iron, all of those vitamins, all the phenolics, all the oils. It's in that drawer right there. It's going into pots for pot growers to grow their plants in, or it's going for hog feed. In the old days, it went down the river, right? We took a really odd turn at some point in the production of what we do, right? It's wasteful too. So you're growing all that wheat and you're only using 70% of it, basically. That's a roller mill, is what that is right there. That's a drawer of white flour. This is in our lab. Where are all of those? They're right in that layer right there, the alurone and then the pericarp, right? So when I said that's where those colors are, that's the white fluffy stuff. That has the same nutritional value of that cotton that it's sitting on, basically. It's starch and gluten, okay? That's great. But what about all the stuff that was on the side over there, right? Okay, so Bethany's chapter, and she has a few that are sort of out of the realm of genetics and plant breeding. One of them is describing this drawing right here. So this is Jean-Michel Basquiat. So this is a drawing that we saw in the movie Radiant Child, which is a description of his life, a biography by Tamara Davis. Jean-Michel Basquiat was an artist in New York City, died when he was 27. He started as a street artist and then became very famous. Did we all hear about the Basquiat that sold for $110 million a few months ago? This was written before that. This was written a few years ago. It took her about a year and a half to write this. The title of this, and it's been published in Leonardo, the Journal of Art, Science, and Technology. So the hard copy will be out in June. It's online right now. If you go to our website, just click on this drawing and her essay will pop up. So the title of it, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Charles Darwin, T.H. Huxley, The Origin of Cotton, Gregor Mendel, Inventor of X-rays. So she wrote about her experience as a geneticist of looking at this piece of art. Not what Basquiat was telling you, but what Basquiat was telling her. How does it affect her as a scientist? The brutality of cotton as a culture and as a crop. How does that come to us as wheat breeders then? Are we the same as cotton in terms of how we develop? So a subtitle of that is Reflecting on Science and Self Through Visual Art. So there's Darwin, there's Huxley, and there's Mendel, the inventor of X-rays. He invented genetics, as we know. So, and I'm wrapping up here. So I mentioned access to what we do, and part of access is knowledge. So Kim here, that's the oven that I'll talk about, Bethany in the Field. They wrote a children's book that'll be coming out March 12th. It's published through Readers to Eaters. Readers to Eaters is a food literacy program for children, starting very young and helping them know what food is. This story is about Iris and her Aunt Mary. Aunt Mary is a scientist. She comes over on a Saturday and they make whole wheat bread together. They make sourdough and the bread is delicious. So that's Readers to Eaters. It's a really nice publishing house if you haven't heard about them. So they did Zora Zucchini and a few other children's books. I think this is very important in the lab too, that we can name a species and we can write kids' books, right? So just real quick, that oven was bought for us by Skagit Community Foundation. It's a portable oven that we bring to food banks and schools and do baking demos. Kim does those herself. So that thing comes out, you just put it in your car and bring it to places that don't have ovens, and you can show people techniques. Okay, so that's it. I just quickly, that's Colin running for lunch or something. Scientists that we work through, it's not all inclusive. The folks that we work with, Cliff Bar Family Foundation and Seed Matters, we don't do anything that makes a better Cliff Bar. What Cliff Bar wants us to do is continue to train scientists that can go out in the community with PhDs that can talk about genetics and flavor and nutrition and things like that. So they're really great for us. Skagit Community Foundation, we work at Drexel in terms of outreach into urban settings with what we do. Patagonia is a really strong partner for us as well. So they want to do for food what they've been able to do with textiles. I think it's really important. So, and I'll just end here. That's barley, and there is room for beauty in what we do. So, thank you. Questions?
So have at it as tradition holds. If there's a student who wants to ask the first question.
Yes.
I have two questions, if I'm allowed.
Sure.
The first one is in your slide that talked about the process by which all of these nutrients are taken from the wheat, and obviously we all know that they're enriched at some point in time, perhaps maybe. In your experience, do you know of any way to capture what's been taken out in that process and then use that as the enriching agent?
So the important point is, so they enrich because if your main calorie source was white flour, you get berry. So they don't put zinc back in, they don't put selenium in, they put very little back in. So it's iron and thiamine, very little do they put back in. They put it in because that stuff is so nutrient poor. The best way is to leave it in to begin with and make something that works. The next way is then to repurpose that. So if that's not okay, then to put on your plate that whole kernel, right? So let's say I just refuse to do anything with whole wheat. I'm going to use the white flour. I'm also going to take that 30%. I'm going to do something with it, right? Or put it into dessert. I'm going to do something with it, right? But the best way is to eat that whole kernel. And then what happens to that wheat too in terms of making those nutrients bioavailable, right? Has it been fermented? Has it gone through some time or something like that? So. Yes?
I have two questions. They kind of both touch on the decrease in ash,
Uh-huh.
but from different perspectives. First of all, I was wondering if you could put the measurable decrease of ash in context of the larger trend that I'm familiar with of for a variety for many grains decreasing protein content, which is often associated with increasing yields. So as you're increasing yields, you have decreasing protein content. How does this selection on ash interact with that?
Okay.
The other is a more kind of, I don't know, philosophical question about how you as a plant breeder think about the idea of improved nutrition as a rationale for transgenics. So
Good.
golden rice and all that.
Sure. The first one is, and I had another column there that I didn't get into and how that was related to yield. So in some of those, like iron and zinc, there is no relationship between yield and ash, and yield and those values. Selenium, there is, right? So it really depends on how that yield is coming, and that's why a lot of flavor and nutrients went away in what we've been breeding for, because if it's a vegetable or fruit, there's just more water in there, basically, right? The cells are larger. In wheat, there's more endosperm, right? So that seed is bigger, and it's all starch and gluten that's coming in. There doesn't have to be a trade-off, and trade-off is a word that they throw around on that. There doesn't need to be a trade-off for most of those traits for that. You can, what I didn't talk about is the yield that we get in this part of the country. So in organic fields, we can get upwards of 160 bushels per acre where we are. You don't have to know what a bushel is. You just need to appreciate that the average yield in the state of Kansas, the wheat state, is less than 40 bushels per acre. We're 4 times that. So these iron and zinc levels are coming off things that are yielding 4 times what wheats do in Kansas. There are also arguments that, well, nutrition's going down, but the yield is going up, so it's okay, right? We're harvesting iron per acre. People don't eat by the acre, they eat by the plate or the slice. So it has to be concentrated in that. The other one is the argument for using GM to that. All of this, if you just look for it, you'll find most of those things. In terms of iron and zinc, we're able to triple it just by looking for it, right, without doing GMO. The argument for golden rice, I don't buy. If these arguments are being used to sell a technology, I think you could argue equally effectively, or why are these folks having these deficiencies within their diet, and is this actually going to fix it? And for that vitamin, you need fat in your diet, and you need a lot of other things related to it. So, and I think there's 180 patents on it or something like that. So I don't buy a few of those arguments. That's one. Another one is we're all going to starve, right? Because there's food-based misery today, and yesterday and tomorrow, and overproduction isn't going to fix it, right? It hasn't yet. I don't know how it's going to tomorrow. So there are other issues there, other very simple answers. Simple in terms of what they are, not simple in terms of carrying them out. So we have to decide if we want to do it or not. Doesn't take biotech. Yes?
Returning to your eugenics, I'm wondering if you're thinking how you prevent a return of eugenics under this risk.
Well, I tell you, you have to ask if it went away, right? It went away as a titled course. You still see, and they usually pull them pretty quickly, but at the beginning of biotech in the late 80s, early 90s, you'd say, we're on a path to better humans. Do you want to join the, whatever? So I don't know. I think being aware that, well, one way would be being aware of what we did and why and how and who did it, right, is an important start for it, right? But yeah, beyond that, I think it takes two of, and I don't know how to word it quite, but getting folks more involved in what's actually going on, right? Of don't allow us to figure it out, right? It didn't work. It never works. Yes.
So you're one of you're breeding organic wheat, and your priorities are taste, flavor, but I'm curious, are you also dealing with breeding for characteristics like disease?
So yeah, so everything we do starts with the farmer. Our main selection trait first is disease resistance. So we work with organic and conventional. So we mimic the community that we're in. There's both. So the first thing is disease resistance, no matter what. It has to work for the farmer. So we're not into boutique wheats and things like that aren't going to yield well. It has to work for the farmer. That brings the price point down, the access point, and everything else. So yes, it's the very first thing we look at. And then we add on traits as we go. So you just have to look for them. But yeah, we're very traditional in how we breed up to the point where then we bring it in the lab and figure out uses. Any other? In the back, yes.
I think one of the reasons that sometimes whole grain products we've had bad tasting ones is because sometimes with the higher fat, there's the rancidity issue. And I just wondered if anyone
For sure.
was addressing that and or
For sure.
considering products, considering a way for the consumer to know when a product is turned.
For sure, for sure. So there's a few issues with it. One is rancidity. So a lot of the whole wheat that you're buying in a grocery store out of a bag is probably rancid. Right? There's a good chance of it, right? The stuff we get usually is. So that's one. The other one is lack of moisture in the baking. So if you just wanted to, it's not quite to your question, I'll get back to the rancidity, but if you want to make good whole wheat products, you can't just take your white flour recipe and substitute in whole wheat. You need the right wheat to begin with, and then you need to add more moisture. And then you need to handle it differently and things like that. But rancidity is a huge one, and there's a few ways around it. And we don't see it as an argument we don't see it as a reason to go to white wheat, but that is one reason they go to white wheat, is shelf life and whatever. One way to do it is fresh milling. And that's one that just drives a centralized system bonkers, right? Is we lost 25,000 mills in this country, okay? The mills that we associate with now do milling on demand, basically. You go up to the counter and you can get stuff that was milled there. We do a lot of home milling. You lose flavors as it ages as well. So freshness in wheat, if wheat is handled as a fresh product, immediately it decentralizes the whole system. You could say, well, then you lack the cost benefit of scaling up. We don't believe that either, right? So we have a miller that buys directly from farmers. They pay at least $1.50 more per bushel, which is a benefit to them. They mill fresh and they mill on demand for the community. So it depends what we want in our food system, right? If we want stability, if we want a flour tortilla that's going to last 2 years in a plastic bag on the counter, we've already got it, right? So we're there. Is that what we want, or do we want flour that can last for 3 years, or do we want flour that lasts for 3 weeks? It's all what we want. Again, with the price point and access in mind. So what I didn't mention is Bethany Econopoly worked with Chipotle, speaking of tortillas, to take 7 ingredients out of their flour tortillas. So they went from 12 to 5, and they added more whole grain in there. That took Chipotle saying, we want to do this. We want to take these out. It means they have to change how they do it. Their shelf life is not as long. A lot of things are not the same. When I go see my mother, she's in her mid-90s, the first thing I do is clean out her fridge. I was there a year ago, and in the back of the fridge were some flour tortillas that I had missed the last several times. They were past their expiration date by 1.5 years. They look beautiful. I mean, they look absolutely spectacular. Okay, that's chemistry. That's not us. So, but I mean, if that's what we all want, that's great too. It's beautiful.
Jerry, man, I'm at
Hey.
faculty here.
Oh.
2 questions I want to follow up